This is the story of a battle. When the battle is won, it will be more important than the atom bomb. When the battle is won, man will have the power to determine what manner of people shall inherit the earth. This man is one of the leaders of this fight. His name is Walter Gilbert. He is a scientist.
Presenting The Scientist.
This is Harvard University, and this is the story of three men: Walter Gilbert, Mark Ptashne, James Watson. In 1962, Professor Watson won the Nobel Prize for work on the structure of the gene, key to human heredity. Now, working with him, Gilbert and Ptashne, two outstanding young scientists, push forward his research to find another key, to understand why one cell creates a genius and another gives man cancer. The name of this key is the repressor. If they and others who follow them succeed, man will ultimately control his own heredity. This is the story of their search and their fierce rivalry as they remember it.
There are actually two races involved. First race was just to discover the repressor itself. The second, in one sense, to show how it worked. The rivalry got that at one stage, and we all went through a sort of very tense stage. It was something that we were doing in competition with each other, Mark, myself.
The problem I wanted to solve more than any, since I've been in science, has been the repressor. It was a tremendous challenge to be able to solve that problem. The tension built up over this period of about a year and a half when we worked full blast, to the exclusion of anything else, in that terrible state where if you fail, you've just wasted your time. As in so many biological experiments, a negative answer is of no interest. Many people had tried and had failed, and most people at this stage were not willing to make the kind of investment of time and energy that we were putting in to try to get the thing. So there was the tension in that sense built up tremendously. You do something flashy or clever, that doesn't matter. It's what's important that counts. What's important scientifically, what's really a big task. So, anyway, I started working on the repressor and then worked for about, 18 months. The main experience throughout all this time was failure. You'd get up in the morning, work like a dog, put the thing on the counter, look at the counts, and it failed. And it failed. I remember we tried many different things. In the meantime, I was constantly talking to Wally, and we were beating our heads against the wall. I think we started about the same time. Maybe I started a little sooner, I'm not sure. Well, I was working along my lines, and suddenly Wally and I had this idea of how to proceed along another line. And so we found ourselves in this no-holds-barred competition. And if it had been a few weeks or a month or two, that would have been one thing, but it went on for 18 months. It's the kind of experiment where if you don't succeed, it doesn't mean anything. A negative experiment often in biology doesn't mean anything. It's not like an exercise in logic. And then you'd look at the results, and you'd think you'd have an effect of a few percent or something. You'd then work and work and work, and it would fail, and it'd fail over and over again. The main experience during this time being failure. But the two of us in competition really, I think, helped drive us on. The general feeling was, sure, everybody says he's going to isolate the repressor, and a lot of guys have tried it, and they try it for a while, and then they give up.
Throughout their contest, it was these tallies that told them the score. For these machines are the final testing ground. They report whether elements brought together are behaving as scientists hope they will. This mechanical judge impartially tells them exactly where they are and can sometimes indicate the path they should take.
No, we're almost out of time here. Mark.
Yeah?
Hey, do you have any time?
What, you want another machine?
Yeah. I'm getting kicked off this machine in about 10 minutes.
All right, just a minute.
Every time you come to me, you bitch about the counters.
Well, because because it's never solved.
What is it, moonlighting?
Well, I wouldn't want to say what it is. There just aren't enough counters. I mean, every other lab, they have a counter for each lab. And as it is, we got everybody in the building working on 3 or 4 counters. It's as though you had to wait 2 or 3 days to do a sucrose run. And furthermore, half the counters aren't any good. I mean, if you're going to do double label counting, and they got to be first rate, it's just terrible. And then if 2 or 3 guys decide to do all their experiments at one time, bingo, you can't get on it for 2 or 3 weeks.
Why? You mean those people aren't any good or wasting your time?
I wouldn't want to say they have the right to use the machine, but unfortunately, if there are 3 or 4 guys doing experiments, then there just aren't enough machines. Wally has one most of the week. Somehow he manages to sign up way in advance. We never seem to do that.
Why?
Well, you see, it's very inefficient. If you have to project when you're going to use the counter 2 weeks in advance, the chances that all you can do is just sign up for every night. You may use it, you may not. But if you try to realistically assess, you can't do that more than a day or 2 in advance. If you wait a day or 2, till it's a day or 2 in advance, then you find it's all signed up. So then what?
Well, can someone loan us one?
I think so. I think you can lease them. It's very discouraging. So then what happens?
So we can solve the problem by you putting in a new research grant application.
We got guys up there now 8 in the morning every Monday signing up for the whole week, pushing each other out of line, that kind of thing. So I have to bitch about it every time.
Yeah, but you never put in for money.
Well, I'll put in for the money, but something's got to be done sooner than that.
For Jim Watson at 40, this rivalry is reminiscent of his own life. At 23, he was involved in a similar struggle. It was the race to find the structure of DNA, the genetic material which blueprints what all living cells shall become, the key to life itself. Against the greatest minds of his time, Watson won. His reward was the Nobel Prize and fame. Having lived through the battle, he tries, with compassion and skill, to move the work forward.
The real problem is we don't really understand. The experiment still isn't working.
The worst time is when you do the experiment the second time, because you never know. The only real pleasure is when you do it the third time.
Well, in a way, it's a valuable kind of attitude to have. I think the only way is to carry something through, publish it, and then take responsibility for it.
Knowing that maybe there's a 2% chance you're wrong.
Yeah, you always have to face that.
Mark has an intense competitiveness which reflects itself. Whether he's playing football or whether he's doing anything, Mark always wants to get there first. He has a real ability to sort of focus on important things. Enormous ambition, unless coupled with good sense, won't get you anywhere. At times, I think Mark's pretty inconsiderate. But I'm sure people thought the same of me. Wally is about good molecular biologists you find in the United States, if not the world. There's some very good people in the field, and Wally's certainly one of those.
The most interesting, dedicated young scientists are chosen to work here from among famed universities and laboratories. Men like Dr. Benno Muller-Hill, who has come from Germany to work in the Watson-Gilbert laboratory.
If I may be permitted about 5 minutes of argumentation, I can more clearly state what the problems are as we face them.
Among the effective tools of the molecular biologist is the seminar. At these informal verbal laboratories, they presented their work in process. Ptashne and Gilbert sharpened their still unproven ideas against each other.
The second question is, if all this is right, how... at this stage, I'm not sure of that for the last...
Dr. Watson's contribution to our knowledge was the co-discovery with Francis Crick of the structure of the gene which carries the blueprint of this heredity. In the cell, there are several million different genes, each of which has the power to affect what sort of cell it will turn out to be, whether it will help a man live to be 90 or end his life at 20. Genes are made of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. And today, at the center of molecular biology is the question of what determines whether a gene will function one way or another. Much of the answer must lie in discovering how specific molecules called repressors act. Despite the fact that scientists believed repressors existed, no one had yet isolated the repressor. And until the repressor was isolated, no one could be sure what controlled the way the genes functioned and the way life could ultimately be understood or controlled. It was to isolate this repressor, this key to life, for which Wally and Mark struggled.
So it's very much a risk to simply go ahead and isolate the products of the controlling genes because there's no guarantee that that will solve any basic problem. What's the problem? You don't agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that.
Well, I certainly
That's a sour grape statement.
Who's got sour grapes? This is a statement made in 1965 in anticipation of how the repressor problem was going to be solved. It seems to me a perfectly valid argument.
It's perfectly true. During the period about 1960, Two, there was no guarantee that anything would work.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to make a general statement for publication, you say, fine, let's propose that we take on a 20-year project, get everything else along the way.
No, I think that completely ignores what I think is a very serious issue, and that is if any complicated interpretation of the genetics is accepted, it makes no sense to go ahead and isolate the product of the regulatory gene. That seems to me quite straightforward.
During this period, I would tease Mark. I get a lot of release just by teasing Mark about his problem and sort of trying to push him in that problem. It's a way of just generating my own release and taking my mind off the fact that our problem wasn't working, but maybe his would. I would tease him, push him. Some of this gets pretty rough. Some of it's easy to take, probably rough for him to take. It was just a way of balancing my own problems out.
The struggle was balanced in all ways but one. As a professor, Wally Gilbert had a well-paying job. As a postdoctoral student, Mark Ptashne had to have money to continue his work. This money was provided through a junior fellowship from the Harvard Society of Fellows upon the recommendation of Jim Watson, a senior member of the society. This distinguished organization gathers for dinner and convivial talk once a week.
Because obviously
Rejected out of her.
Obviously, they don't believe any of the experiments. No, but assuming all over it. No, but under conditions where you're getting specific binding and you can count the number of sites. What's the highest binding constant you get?
There's moderately low.
What kind of cells have you got? Do you keep them to yourself or what?
No. They're all around. I give them out to the lab. People come in and use my cells all the time.
If you're talking about an experiment, you suggest an experiment and you think you might want to do it, it's just possible that if Wally gets interested one night, it'll get done. And then where are you? It's not just the rivalry. It was also the fact that almost every day I would talk to Wally at great length about what both of us were doing. That was very helpful. There was never any question about exchanging information and facts and help, hints and so on. We had different backgrounds. Wally's was more biochemical. Mine was more genetic. And so we had different kinds of things to bear. These conversations were very important, not just psychologically, but also in terms of just information and suggesting new things to do and so on. Very important to me. One of the things about Wally that is really amazing is his stupendous ability in the face of failure to keep working. We both had to have it above average, but I would say Wally is almost in a class by himself. I would get depressed. Sometimes I would just feel like my guts had been kicked out after really expecting something and then, again, failing and failing. But whenever Wally would fail, it would just spur him on. He would fight the depression and the dismay just by working that much harder.
Oh, got the counts from last night.
Small effects, but not much.
Okay. Let's see how it looks. Thank you. Now a piece of graph paper. And look at that, it's just silly. The scatter of the points is such a, we can't do anything with it.
There's some effect, but just a little.
Very, very small. So we'll do it again.
Okay.
The control points are all right. They're beautiful, in fact. The main points are just the main experiment. The numbers aren't good enough. Control looks beautiful on this, but it's the experiment that doesn't work. When you fail, you feel discouraged, but in order to do science successfully, you have to be pretty resistant to that sort of discouragement. You have to be able to accept it without being thrown completely by it. You live for the spectacular successes as they come your way, and you have to be resistant against the failures. You protect yourself in a large sense against serious feelings of frustration and failure. Over a long period, though, when nothing works, when nothing keeps on working, you can get tremendously discouraged. If you're in the university, we protect ourselves, we in the academic world protect ourselves against this by a variety of mechanisms. One is we teach. That's very useful because that gives you a purpose that's purely secondary to your scientific research activity. But it's a tremendously protective activity because it's something that you can do which does not require quite the same edge of commitment.
I put up on the board over there several papers which we will want to read, which I'd like you to read for next time. These papers will take us into the subject which we'll talk about starting next week, the subject of the activating enzymes. And these are a set of effectively classic papers in that field. When you read these papers, read them and try to ask yourself several questions about them, just to form your own thinking about them. Whenever you read a paper, especially for this course, ask yourself, what questions are the authors trying to ask? Ask yourself also, what questions have they managed to answer, which may not be at all the same as those they think they're asking, those they say they're asking, or those they are in effect asking. And ask yourself also, what questions have they left unresolved, or what questions get posed by the papers?
One of the practical functions of scientists is to make other scientists. That's not really the reason that scientists teach. They don't think of it in terms of making other scientists, but they think of it as much more self-serving. There is a self-serving aspect to making other scientists. But the major thing you're looking for is an audience. The science that we do is one that we take pleasure in, and we like other people to take pleasure in it. The only way of finding people to take pleasure in it is, in fact, to teach them. We create them just in order to have an audience to play against. The academic role is very dangerous, can be very dangerous, because as a professor, you are supposed to be an expert. And your teaching role is, in fact, one of showing your expertise continually over and over again to new crops of students. That's a very dangerous role. It's very dangerous because after a while you come to believe it. If you are an expert, you do know something, you've got something to say to these people coming up. And that can be very cloying. And it tends to remove your own, it tends to work against your own sense of wonder. It tends to work against your own imaginative abilities. You've seen the answers too many times before. You've provided the answers too many times before. You've heard that question asked too many times before. And that's very dangerous because very often the question that is answered interestingly is not a new question. But it's a question that strikes somebody who hears it for the first time as a new question. And strikes him in such a way that he provides a new answer. And this is something that's harder and harder to do. This is one of the reasons that scientists might grow old. It's harder and harder to do as you grow old just because you've heard the questions before. You're more likely to, in hearing the question, know the old answer. You don't provide you don't see the world with new eyes. A little bit of the work that one does rubs off on one's children, one's family. One summer, I spent looking for the repressor, a period in which the work actually had no fruitful outcome. But during that, the children knew that I was looking for something, and since one could express it to them in those terms, they responded very, very actively. They would come down. My wife would bring them down onto the laboratory lawn. At lunchtime, they'd bring down a lunch. We'd all eat out on the lawn. And I'd hear them crying out under the window when they had all just arrived, "Daddy, have you found it yet?"
It's very nice to see Wally be with children, and that's a recent development because when they were younger, he did not have a feeling for babies particularly. He does enjoy doing things, and now that the children have gotten older, he's very good about doing something with them if he can. And I imagine that as they get older, he will do more because he can respond to that need in them, which he couldn't before when they were just very delectable to me, but not so much to him. I grew up in a house where a man's work was the most important thing in the house. Without any doubt, everything was sacrificed to that, and it seems perfectly natural to me to be married to a man whose work is the most important thing, to whom everything else is very vague and far away.
Yeah? Okay, be right there.
You've heard it said it takes two to make a quarrel, eh? I can never get him to quarrel. That is the delightful thing about being married to Wally. Can't argue with Wally. I either always agree with him or he isn't listening. And I can always interrupt him and keep right on talking. And then he looks up and smiles, and then I think he's answered me, but of course he hasn't. That's how we make do.
John, Kate, dinner. Come on in.
Oh, John, do you know what dinner is?
Spaghetti.
Spaghetti and what?
Meat sauce.
Everybody pass up their plates.
I got it first.
Hey, John, are you still studying weaving in school?
Are you studying Indian?
When?
When you were weaving.
No.
Then why were you weaving?
Because we're studying weaving.
Wally does not discuss his work with me. First of all, because I can't understand it. Secondly, because Wally is not communicative about himself. Maybe that's the firstly, that he doesn't really talk about himself. In moments of great excitement and pleasure, he said things are going well. But he is not the sort of husband who comes home and tells me what happened at the lab today, dear.
No, she has to walk a little bit. On a chilly night in early spring, Tommy and Annika left the little town for the first time in their lives to travel out.
Although he gets depressed when his work doesn't go well, the really marvelous characteristic that Wally has going for him is a fundamental, profound, and just ineluctable kind of optimism. So that all during the period when he was looking for the repressor, he managed with the idea in mind that today he was going to find it. When Wally has something interesting to work on, then he's happy.
Their health comes before school, said Doctor. The doctor had said, and they'll get to know the South Sea.
What are you reading, Katie?
Ptashne on stocking.
How do you like it?
I like it very well. Islands firsthand, added Pippi. Tommy and Annika's mother and father were also on the pier. Tommy and Annika suddenly felt lumps in their throat when they saw their parents wiping their eyes with handkerchiefs. But Tommy and Annika still couldn't keep from being happy, so happy that it almost hurt.
There are very few ways of helping your husband out of a depression when he's hit a snag in his work, and maybe the best thing to do is not notice, because one gets so depressed oneself that I've found in times when Wally is down, it's really best if I just keep very steady myself and just try and run the house as usual. Wally has never neglected me in a real sense of neglect. So I have never felt like a neglected wife. I think if a woman knows that she is loved, and she knows that absolutely, then the outward manifestations or signs, the togetherness on Sundays, the excursions with the children, this is what happened at the lab today, dear, reports, are not that important if she has that assurance. And Wally and I have known each other a long time. We've had a lot of fun. Merely because he's out of the house doesn't mean that I'm neglected.
That's very tricky. Okay.
Okay, kids. Time for bed. Time. Going upstairs. Wash your face and hands. Okay. Good night.
Hey, John. Okay.
Good night, Elsa.
Oh.
They must have been tired out. They went without any fuss. Considering how's John's chess?
It's improving a bit.
He doesn't like losing, I think.
Who does? I don't know. If I'm not tied up in preparing lectures or some of the other occupations that take time, I would normally go back into the laboratory to do something, or to see something, or to have something done. It's where I live.
There's a sense in which a scientist is lonely. And if you do not drive yourself to work, no one will drive you. And it's very much as though you're perfectly free to sit at home. You can sit at home and sulk if you can't get the ideas to work to come out. If the science isn't working perfectly well, if I get too depressed by it, too depressed by the failure. In terms of maintaining the pace in the laboratory, I find it very easy to lose myself in that work, to absorb myself so entirely in the laboratory work that I'm not conscious of the failure, that I'm interested in what is going on. And there's really a long period of failure in this, and it's failure in a sense that's always very unpleasant. That I had to be spurred on by adversity, otherwise we would never have gotten through it. Failure did not make me quit. That's a conscious choice in this sort of game.
When the seminars, the experiments, the daily work, the grind get too much, the scientist community throws cares away and tries to forget what keeps them awake at night. Professor Watson hosts a party.
Increase your life by 5 years and be very sad. There is no time to start something with an attack and go straight through. Rather, you have to put it on the boat, and then you have to tighten, that's right. So that every note gets a little louder and then a little softer. The point being that what is considered a risk. The point I think it's a myth. It's a myth, Mark. It's a matter of risk. But most people read it now.
The Gilbert Ptashne rivalry spills over from science to music. It is a popular misconception that the scientist knows a very great deal about a very limited subject. In fact, the scientist is likely to be more a man for all seasons than his counterpart in the humanities. But the humanist too often knows almost nothing about science.
And if you want to know what a double-helix is, ask any rat-wit girl. And if she smiles as if she knows it, isn't a girl you want to take home to mom.
The scholars of the world have always flocked to this university. Now more than ever, scientists have made this their home. It has become the assurance of a successful career as well to be admitted here as a graduate student or a postdoctoral fellow. Why do you want to be a biochemist?
Well, I'm fascinated by the material. It's just so exciting. When Queen's College set up a biochem lab, I started working in it.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I've been involved with it.
Yeah. Then you came here. What value would it be here?
I sort of feel that a PhD would just be marvelous in the sense that I'd be able to teach college and carry.
Is there any particular branch of biochemistry
That interests me a lot?
Yeah.
The genetics. I realize that it's being swamped, but everyone's going into it.
Yeah, I think it's
This summer.
slight overemphasis.
Yes.
You know, I like to be optimistic, but we have.
Yes, I
we
do.
had 91 applications. About 60 were very good.
Yes.
Now, I was going over applications yesterday, and it was, extremely, lots of people all saying, they're the best students they've had for 5 years. Then how do you choose?
I feel excited enough about it now that if I were to go ahead with it, I would do well.
Okay, I think someone else is waiting.
Fine, okay.
The most interesting, dedicated young scientists are chosen to work here as a graduate student or postdoctoral fellow. Despite the intensity of his own research work, Walter Gilbert must find time and energy to guide them.
Hi, Dick. What's happening with somebody? Well, we seem to have been able to separate the subunits pretty well now. One there, one there. It's a beautiful band.
Dr. Mary Osborne, a postdoctoral fellow from Cambridge University, England. Roger Hendricks, a graduate student from Caltech. Jan Pirro, a graduate student from Oberlin College. Dr. Maxime Schwartz, a postdoctoral fellow from the Pasteur Institute in Paris. Dick Burgess from Caltech, about to publish his doctoral thesis.
I'm going to postdoc for 2 years, as you know, in Geneva, but I'm really not at all sure what I'll be doing after that. Now, somebody in molecular biology's got choices to, you can go and work in a university. How many? And you can work in a university, you can work in an industrial lab, you can work in government, or you can work in some kind of a private research institution. Is there really any choice, or does everybody end up in the university? Going to go on the university, you got to do something during that postdoc period. Right, well, what about something like going into a basic research lab in industry? I mean, there is good research being done in industry in physics and chemistry. Yeah. The problem is molecular biology. And you industrial lab? Say you've got your time after your postdoc, but you normally would spend as an instructor at a university somewhere. If you can get a good salary, plenty of equipment, a good research budget, technical help. You sound like an advertisement. No, it can be appealing. Well, it seems to me the most important thing is the people you're working with. Yeah. And it's not even necessarily they're not able to come back. On one side, you won't want to. On the other side, you're unlikely to do enough independent research to be able to come back. Well, is that really true? Is that just academic prejudice, or is that... Well, of course, it's academic prejudice. The academic prejudice is there, and it tends to keep the people away from industry. The question really is, though, how much freedom one can have to do what one wants in industry. Well, can you really go and work on R&D? Why could you go and work on R&D? I think probably that there are many research labs in industry where you can't, where your research is directed, but I think that more and more they're thinking that it would be a good idea to do some more basic research. Obviously, industry wants to attract good scientists. I don't know. It depends on how free. I mean, the freedom to follow one's own desires in science. The freedom to do the experiments that strike you as most relevant, rather than doing the experiments that strike somebody else as most relevant. Well, that's wonderful if the other guy's right. No, but it's terrible if he's wrong. In industry, you probably get a larger percentage of useful results. But do you think the situation with respect to industrial labs is getting better, and do you think more people, more firms putting more money into molecular biology? Oh, I think definitely so. I mean, there was none 5 years ago. But and now there are several. The attitude we take is almost that the discoveries we make in basic research, by following our own instincts as to what is the most crucial question to ask at any one time, that these are the lines that pay off in the long run. You pick a drug out of a random search. You pick an anti-cancer drug, say, out of a random search. You try it on animals, it kills something. It kills a tumor. It even works that way. Now, you have several types of research you can do on it. You can go look at it in human beings. You can try it on cases. You can try just to see, maybe by accident, that drug will work. You can be slightly more abstract, and you say, well, let's go in and see what the drug is really doing to any cell, and that's where we can use that as a probe to why it's working and why it happens to be used here and not to be somewhere else. I mean, take a much longer range viewpoint, and that says we don't know how any of the cells are working at all. And that if we knew the answer to that problem, then we would be able to design the drugs to control the system.
But that's a problem which you can only do in the university, because that's the way in which you ask the question in the university.
But it seems to me that just sometimes feel like a parasite when you are working in basic research. You're just doing what you like, you choose a problem, say, and you just try to solve it because you like to solve problems, and you feel that you are not at all of any use to the society. Whereas if you go to the industry, then you may say, work in drug research or something like that, and try to find out the drug which will cure people so really are of some use in society.
I think you're advocating all responsibility. You can't say that it's all one-sided.
Why advocating? I mean, on the contrary, I think it's a minor point. They may give you the precise direction for research, but you have chosen that it was better for the society. Well, you are playing a better role in the society if you were trying to use your brain to be of some use.
This is a very different. It's true that a much tinier fraction of what we do is ever going to be of real use. But that tiny fraction is of much greater use. That tiny fraction is what motivates all the rest.
If you choose science, it's not for money, it's just because you like to solve problems.
We say we'll produce for you, even though you give us a chance to go be scientists. We'll produce for you constantly. Our research will pay you off constantly. That's a very hard bet to make. It's hard to do. It's hard to continually produce. It isn't sufficient just to be clever in the laboratory. It isn't sufficient just to be competent to always do an experiment that has an answer. It isn't even sufficient to have occasional flashes of genius and get ideas which no one else has. Because those ideas have to pay off, and they have to pay off at yearly intervals, or your grants won't get renewed. So people do science at personal risk. See what you're asking for society. You get your education. Nowadays, you get your graduate education paid for either by the government or by the universities. You get a postdoctoral fellowship. Somebody has sunk $100,000 to $20,000 in you by that time. And although we try to copper all the bets, make sure that you are likely to pay off by looking at you and watching you and seeing how well you perform in class and how well you perform in laboratory, there's no guarantee that you'll pay off. There's no guarantee at all that at that point you'll be anything better than a competent hack. We hope we can make you competent, even if you're going to be a hack at the end of it. You know, you can also be a very happy shoemaker. Take Einstein. Let's take Einstein. Einstein said the best way for a young man to do science was to be a plumber. To take a job. He did. He said this. And what he meant by it was you would so disconnect your life that you weren't forced to live by your science. It's very difficult to live by your science in the sense that if you wish to make a living by it, you must produce. You must not only be a technically competent scientist, and you must not only have occasional flashes of genius, but you've got to make all those flashes pay off, and they have to pay off sufficiently regularly so you get a paycheck.
But I think this is a minor point. I just took the decision that I wanted to work for the society. And then whether I choose myself this particular problem or I do not, I think is not the main point. The main point is, do I want my work to be of use or not? Do I want to feel like a parasite, or do I want to feel useful like a plumber or a shoemaker?
They continued to work, despite the overwhelming possibility that everything they were doing would add up to nothing.
Hi. Thanks. You see the results from yesterday? Oh, God. We still haven't got anything.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, pretty bad.
The only other alternative is just to try to get something which binds title.
How long is it going to take?
2 days for the first selection, and then the whole thing about 2 weeks.
How about Amazon? The whole thing takes so long.
You can start right away.
We may as well try it. Okay. So we make choice.
They struggled. They tried many experiments. One seemed to work, but after one successful test, they couldn't do it a second time. This was a mystery. They had followed the right path, and they had come to the end of the line. Eventually, they discovered the original assumption upon which their experiments were based was wrong, and a year's work went down the drain.
No, you put it on the board. Yeah, well, okay. If you take let's say we take the likeness, right, and we UV it. Now, if we add the 434, if this is right, this means that all the trouble we've been having for the last 6 months would be cleared up. But if you figure,
a very small amount.
Yeah, a very small amount. But if you
The lambda, if that works fine, should be in the order of...
So when would it try?
Well, right now.
Mark had a scheme, and then Wally had a way which he thought that he and Benno might get it out. We both wanted to find the answer, and it was obvious that if one found the answer and the other didn't, it was sort of sad for the person who didn't.
What's up? Nothing.
Nothing's worked. Well, you think it's there?
I hope so.
Fine.
Gotta be there.
So, what is this, just more random pressure?
Yeah.
Where are you going to go, up or go up?
Well, we'll just... I don't know where we go from here.
No, I think I was open for Mark.
Success or failure doesn't affect me that much. I think if you live for the success, I think you also have to sort of take into account that on some days it's not going to work. So if you rise up into great orgies of self-congratulation, the other days would seem too pointless. You sort of have to have an existence that takes both success and failure, I think, in a rather quiet way.
It turned out that the protein we were looking at that point was very sensitive to dirt on our fingers, to any sort of dirt anywhere in the glassware, anywhere in the technique. And it took, as I said, some 6 months of miscellaneous effort just to find the phenomenon again. We could then perform a set of tests to ask whether or not that material was a repressor. When you do the experiment, you hold your breath when you go up to the counting room, and you watch the results come out in the counter. You generally run it so that you have run one set of samples which has the effect that you wish to observe. Just to make sure that nothing has gone wildly wrong that day. And when it's put in totally dirty glassware, the world is still working that day the way it was the day before. You put in a set of samples that have the effect that you want to see. You run them through the counter and they show you what they should. It's all going well. And then you put in the control set. I said in this case it should not. It should not be label, there should not be count, because there should not be any repressor. And you hold your breath and you watch that. On the appropriate day, the experiment in fact worked that way. Control was negative. Material wasn't there. Benno congratulated me. I congratulated Benno. We were overjoyed. Overjoyed in a sense, because your joy is muted because you've done the control once, and now you go back and you grow up the cells and you do the whole thing over again, and you check it again just to make sure that you didn't do something strangely wrong that time. And you do the controls in a wholly different way. It's very rare that you can do an experiment that is so persuasive the one time that you do it that you are truly elated by it. Elated enough to at least go out and celebrate. You can go out and celebrate with a partial victory. So you do a few wrong celebrations. It isn't too bad that it was celebrated occasionally and then the next day to find out that you were wrong. But you become moderately wary about it in this sort of game. Don't do it too often. In any case, the second time round, all of the controls worked. The material we were seeing was the material we had looked for. Very often, the particular effort that you're involved in when something actually works is very minor. Things work in bunches. Things work. You go through a period of a week or several months, and things are working all over the place, and then you go through long periods in which they aren't. We try to do science in a state of almost constant excitement, having enough things working all the time so that you can be excited about the new results as they come in.
Shortly after, Wally Gilbert found the key in this first contest. Mark Ptashne, working differently, was able to successfully complete his experiments as well.
I think it is quite clear that if I had been working alone, if any of us had been working alone, we would not have been able to sustain the kind of effort required to do the repressor isolation. This is the problem I wanted to solve more than any since I've been in science. It's been the repressor. And now it's solved. Interestingly enough, the satisfaction was a relief, namely a relief of tension. It isn't as though I exulted when I got it. Rather, I was finally glad I could forget about it, because it was like an obsession.
I think you have to have interesting goals. If your goals really aren't something that really, if you don't think it's important, I think the worst feeling would be failing on something that doesn't count.
One of Jim Watson's goals, now achieved, has been the directorship of the Cold Spring Harbor Biological Laboratories on Long Island. Watson plans to make this place the intellectual center for cancer research and to continue here the work of all molecular biologists toward that universal goal. The work on DNA, on the repressors, will go on towards the understanding of the gene and eventually the knowledge to determine what manner of men shall inherit the earth. He recently married Elizabeth Lewis, and in the future he and Mrs. Watson will divide their time between his work here and his tasks at Harvard.
I think one's always conscious that you may not succeed in something, but if you succeeded before, and if you know that you sort of have friends who still think you're good, you can survive it. If you cut the sort of coldness, I think being alone and, something not coming off is very bad. T.P. Smith said that if one feels that scientists were future-oriented. Occasionally, when you're in school, you have to learn the past, and you learn the things, but what really excites us is not learning something about what we knew 50 years ago, but, what are we going to know 2 years from now? I think that's the nicest thing about science, is that it really gives you something to look forward to in a very real sense.
One looks at all our activities sort of put together, whether we're working in the labs or in the seminars. It's trying to build up a body of knowledge and people who know this knowledge who are really equipped to understand what life is, relations of disease, I guess, to what we know about normal life. I don't think there's any doubt that the work which we've done with understanding chemical basis will have a very profound impact on medicine. And right now, it's probably the most profound impact is trying to understand how viruses can cause various forms of cancer. So you could say the work is directly applicable. Those people who I think believe that many forms of fundamental research are sort of ivory tower, no relationship to practical problems of mankind, I think are being misled. Because I don't think it's possible to really understand many forms of disease without understanding the sort of simple chemical facts which many of us are trying to find. So the thought that what we're doing is just a giant boondoggle is nonsense. In fact, what I think is the more amazing fact about all this work now on in molecular biology, molecular genetics, is how relevant it is to the problem of disease. The work is also directly related to really understanding what life is and its broadest aspects. And I don't think you can distinguish the two. We don't work in order to solve diseases, and I think we work to understand what life is, and in the process we solve diseases. It's a more direct approach to the problem.
This is just one story of one small group in the world of science. More than 500,000 scientists in over 40 different branches of science are working in industry, in government, and at the universities to make your life and mine richer, fuller, longer. There is never enough time in the life of any man, nor enough money in the world's treasuries to do what must be done. So great are the needs, the demands, and the possibilities of what these men and men like them can do as they walk the road to the unknown, the longest road in the universe.
This has been a presentation of ABC News.